G'day, Pastor Blake here. Thanks so much for watching this message today. I pray that this sermon and resource would help grow you in your relationship with Jesus, also in conjunction with a local church. If you have any questions about our church, you can head to our website, devonportcoc.com.au. Again, thanks for watching this message today, and I do hope that it blesses you in your love and devotion towards Jesus Christ. Well, we're in week 3, church, of a series studying the book of Ruth. And if it's week 3, that means that it must be Ruth Chapter 3. And if you have missed any messages in this series, the first 2 weeks, please head to our YouTube channel, because I'm just going to skim over today the first 2 chapters of Ruth before we get into Ruth Chapter 3. But if you want the deep dive, then go back to the first 2 messages on our YouTube channel. In week 1 of chapter 1, we meet a family living in Bethlehem who experienced a great famine in the land of Judah. And so they moved to Moab, and Bethlehem means the house of bread, and yet there's no bread in the house of bread. This Jewish family consisted of a husband, Elimelech, and his name means my God is king. His wife is called Naomi, and her name means pleasant or delightful. They have 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, and the sons' names mean sick or weak and tired and dying respectively. Not the greatest of names. And they all moved to Moab because of the famine in the land in Judah, and moved to the other side of the Dead Sea, which is in fact Moab, which is in fact modern-day Jordan today. So the Moabites, where they moved, the Moabites are a very pagan people. They do not worship Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The Moabites are the ancestors, in fact, of an incestuous relationship between Lot and one of his daughters. And while in Moab, the 2 boys get married, and they both marry Moabite women, 2 Moabite women. Chilion marries Orpah, which means gazelle or fawn, and Mahlon marries Ruth, and Ruth's name means friendship. Friendship. Now, whilst in Moab, things get a whole lot worse for this family, because all the men die. All the men die. Elimelech dies, and sick and tired die. They live up to their names. Now, 3 women are left who are all widows. And Naomi hears that after a decade of living in the land of Moab, and that the famine in Judah is now over, and decides to return to Bethlehem and tells her daughter-in-laws, I am a Jew, and you are Moabite women. My sons, your husbands, are deceased. You both should return to your mother's household and find another husband. So Orpah says, okay, that sounds good to me. So she stays in Moab, and she goes back to her mother. But Ruth says, no, I want to stay with you, Naomi. And we hear this amazing, famous passage of Scripture in chapter 1. I'm going to go with you, and where you go, I will go. Your God will be my God. Where you die, Naomi, I will die also. So Naomi and Ruth are the only family members left. And they return to Bethlehem. And upon returning to Bethlehem, and after experiencing such tragic loss, she tells the local women, who are a bit sure, is that Naomi? We're not sure, it's been a decade. She tells the local women there at the end of chapter 1, yeah, it is Naomi, but don't call me Naomi anymore. Call me Mara. Call me Mara, bitter, because my life is bitter. because God has ruined my life. God has ruined my life. My life is bitter. I said at the conclusion of week 1 that God is going to take a story that is very bitter and make it sweet. Just a side note. Not every story and circumstance in our lives has a happy ending. I mean, I don't need to tell you that. Sometimes God does take a bitter story and makes it sweet. But often, He just gives us the stamina, the grace, peace and endurance to get through the bitter times. But listen to me, He's faithful either way. He's faithful either way, church. So Naomi and Ruth, they returned to Bethlehem just as the barley harvest season is commencing. And it's an important note to remember as the barley harvest signaled the beginning of a new season, in fact, season of first fruits. The barley harvest season sets us up for what follows in chapter 2. And last Sunday, James unpacked where Ruth meets a man named Boaz. And chapter 2 is the beginnings of a redemptive love story. Not just between a man and a woman, but also how it relates to a faithful love story between God and humanity. Ruth meets Boaz the farmer, and Boaz's name means strength, and he is very wealthy. He owns an agricultural business harvesting barley. He is a businessman and he has a lot of employees. Ruth just so happens, as we talked about last week, to be gleaning in a field which Boaz owns. And Boaz allows Ruth to harvest the edges of this field to gain the leftovers, because that indeed was a command under Levitical law to not harvest the edges of your field. If you own land, do not harvest the edges of your field, but leave that for the widows, foreigners, and the poor. It's the way that Old Testament law catered for those who were poor, had no means. And we discover that Boaz is actually, at the end of chapter 2, we discover that Boaz is a relative of Naomi on Elimelech's side of the family. We learn that Boaz is in fact a kinsman redeemer to the family. And as Ruth works the grain fields, she catches the eye of Boaz. And Boaz shows great kindness to Ruth in Ruth chapter 2, as he has indeed heard of her character and her kindness that she herself had demonstrated to Naomi. And the spark is lit. Boaz's heart in Ruth chapter 2 is turning towards Ruth, and there is attraction. But can I just make a point here? Don't miss this. The attraction was that character attracts character. Loyalty attracts loyalty. Faithfulness attracts faithfulness in people. Kindness attracts kindness. And now at the end of chapter 2, mother-in-law Naomi has found a renewed purpose and mission, as we will talk about and discover today. You know what it is? Matchmaking. Matchmaking. Naomi has seen at the end of chapter 2 that maybe God, in fact, has not forgotten her after all. Ruth has found favour by working in a field owned by Boaz, who has shown great kindness towards her. And on top of that, he's a close relative of Naomi's late husband, Mahlon. It seems like despair is turning into hope. So let's start at chapter 3. Chapter 3, verses 1 through to 3. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, I need to say this. Most scholars think that there's 2 months difference between chapter 2 and chapter 3. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law, Naomi, said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you'll be well provided for." Now, Boaz with whose women you have worked is a relative of ours. So tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. Naomi has said, listen, Ruth, this thing we've got going here, it's unsustainable ultimately. And so I have to find a new home for you. I love thank you, but I've got to make some moves here on your behalf. That's what's going on here, church. Naomi desires Ruth to find rest in a new family and with a new husband. And really, Naomi's goal has not changed, church, since chapter 1. Naomi makes it plain in her words, where you will be well provided for. What is she talking about? The benefit, at this time, in this culture, the benefits of bridal happiness, security, and children. Naomi is about to up the ante because she realizes this, that the barley harvest season is coming to an end. And Ruth, because of Boaz's kindness to her in chapter 2, has harvested enough food for a whole year. The purposes of her going to the fields in the first place are now redundant. But soon Ruth, because of the end of the harvesting season, Ruth is going to lose the opportunity to continue to interact with Boaz. You see, the clock is ticking. So let me talk about, in chapter 3 here, let me talk about Naomi's practical plan. In chapter 2, Naomi and Ruth make a plan. We need food. So Ruth, go and glean in a field and collect the leftovers. That was their plan. From that plan, Ruth meets Boaz. And in chapter 3, Naomi has another plan. I want you to know that God's providence is always at work in your life. And God's providence is always at work in my life as well. But here's the thing. You've got to make a move sometime. Hello? You have to make a move. You have to do something on your end of the equation. We have to take some steps. We need to make plans. And Naomi takes initiative. She plans and gives Ruth some advice as she basically plays the role of matchmaker. Tonight, Boaz is going to be at the threshing floor, winnowing, harvesting the barley, and so this is what you should do. Right, what is Naomi's advice to Ruth? Are you ready? Number 1, smell good and look good. Smell good and look good. You need to know that back in ancient times, people never took regular baths. In fact, bathing for Jews was mainly occurred in ceremonial bathing, which wasn't all that regular at all. People didn't shower every day like you and I do, or like most of us probably do. In fact, in medieval times, people only bathed once a year. In fact, in the 1500s, people only bathed once a year, and usually in the month of May. And do you know when they usually got married? The month of June. Join the dots. Okay, so now what would happen annually in medieval times and this kind of thing? I'm making the overall point here that people didn't take baths at all, very regular at all. Okay. But in the 1500s, what would annually happen is that the men of the house would get to bathe first, surprise, surprise, followed by the sons, then the women, followed by the children, and then all the babies. By then, the water would be so filthy and dirty and dark, it seemed that you could lose someone in the bath. And that's where the expression comes from, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And that's true. You can fact check that. It's 100% true. Hey, Ruth, take a bath. You've been out in the fields harvesting for so long. Put on perfume as well. Smell your best. Listen, Ruth, you are a virtuous woman. I know that you're not trying to turn heads. But Naomi is coaching Ruth because she obviously needed it. And maybe some people need some coaching when it comes to courting. Hello. Maybe some younger people need some coaching when it comes to courting. Maybe it's a good thing to glean some advice at times. Ruth attracts Boaz because of her noble character. And don't get me wrong, you will attract the kind of person that you are. Listen, if you're easy, you'll attract easy. If you are virtuous, you'll attract virtuous. But if you are single here today, and there's probably fewer single people here, and probably some people have chosen to be single, you can do that. I'll preach on that later in the year. But listen, if you are single here today and you think that taking care of your appearance doesn't matter, you need to rethink it. You need to rethink it. There is nothing wrong, and there's nothing unspiritual with a woman or a man wanting to look their best if you want somebody to notice you. Sorry, if you think there is, you need to rethink it. Take some initiative, I might say to some younger people in the church. Take some initiative, look your best. Look your best. Clean up a little bit. I hear you say, but Pastor, I have inner beauty. And I would say, fantastic. Peter talks about, I'm not joking, inner beauty is, Peter says that's the most important thing. And inner beauty is amazing and so precious and those things. But I just want to say that if you have inner beauty but you smell like a fish tank, like, come on, don't get offended, like, get real. Like, seriously. So now Naomi basically says to Ruth, go get spruced up tonight, take a bath, get your nails done, and put on your favourite perfume. You're looking a little grungy, Ruth. And then she says, put on your best clothes. Take the fave dress out. Take off your clothes of mourning. And make it plain that you are no longer in mourning. Ruth, the season of mourning is over, and so let Boaz know it. And then says this, I find this amazing. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. Now, here's my question to that verse. How practical is this? What is the spiritual application for this verse? How deep spiritually do we need to go to understand this verse? So, what is God trying to say in these holy scriptures of this verse? Are you ready? Here it is. A man is in a better mood on a full stomach. Well, tell me I'm wrong. Naomi says to Ruth, let him eat his chicken wings in peace, have his wine, watch the game, and then approach him. What is Naomi saying to Ruth? Get your timing right. And anyone who's been married here, or is married here, knows the importance of timing. Right? You know the importance of timing. When to have that conversation and when not to. When to let your husband know that you crashed the car and when not to. When to tell your wife you bought a new guitar and when not to. They say that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach, they say. Well, I think there's a lot of truth to that. Naomi is coaching Ruth, church. And there's nothing wrong with a little coaching and a little mentoring in this area. Like, I'm going to say, if to single people, if you are single and you want to let people know that you're available, or you want to know more about marriage, if you want to know more about marriage and you're single, don't talk to a single person. Talk to a married person. And in particular, talk to a married person whose marriage you want to imitate. Hello? Let's keep reading. You didn't realise how practical this was. Ruth chapter 3, verses 4 through 9. And when he lies down, note the place where he is lying, and then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he'll tell you what to do. He'll tell you what to do. I will do whatever you say, Ruth answered. She's very teachable. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. And when Boaz had finished eating and drinking, he was in good spirits. Surprise, surprise. He went over to lie down at the far end of the grain pile, and Ruth approached quietly, uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, something startled the man, and he turned, and there was a woman lying at his feet. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am your servant Ruth," she said. "Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a guardian redeemer of our family." Now, like if Alison took the blanket off my feet, what I'm going to do during the night in winter, I'm probably going to wake up, right? Like this passage of scripture here, this is a little bit weird, right? Not the sort of advice I would give my daughter. You should stalk him. That'll work. But it really is all about here Jewish culture. And still get Ruth to let Boaz know that she is interested if he's interested. It's okay to give somebody an indication that you are interested. Some guys are slow on the uptake. Ruth is not being seductive or sexually provocative here. This is completely cultural. Now, Boaz asks an appropriate question. I think he wakes up and a woman is lying at his feet, and he says, like, "Is this a dream? If it is, it's a good one." But he asks, "Who are you? Who are you?" And in Jewish culture, when a person lied down at a person's feet, you were showing humility and submission. Ruth is going here in this moment, Ruth is going to let Boaz know what her desires are. Would you, Boaz, as my family's kinsman redeemer, would you spread the corner of your garment over me? What is she saying? Will you protect me? Boaz, throw your spiritual covering over me. Since you are a kinsman redeemer of our family. She's basically saying, Boaz, will you marry me? Will you marry me? A kinsman redeemer, the Hebrew word for it is goel, G-O-E-L, and it appears 23 times in the book of Ruth. Goel is the nearest living blood male relative. When a woman was widowed back in Jewish culture, back in biblical times, she basically became destitute. Jewish law, however, said that if the husband dies, that the way that the widow could avoid a life of poverty and have a future and avoid a life of destitution was by the man's nearest blood relative had an obligation to marry the widow. I'll get to more of that in a minute. But the question is, what are the obligations of a kinsman redeemer in Levitical law? Well, there are four as the Bible describes it. Number one, that he was responsible to buy a fellow Israelite out of slavery, if they were in his family. He was responsible to be the avenger of blood, to make sure the murder of a family member came to justice. He was responsible to buy back family land that had been forfeited from debt. And this is the one that we're talking about. He was responsible to carry on the family name by marrying a childless widow. Excuse me. So, to wrap it all up in one sentence, really, the kinsman redeemer was the person responsible to safeguard the person's property and the posterity of the family. And this is why Ruth is appealing to Boaz at the threshing floor. If you are interested, Boaz, I am interested. Will you marry me? Let's keep reading. So he wakes up and he realizes who it is. And he says, "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after the younger men." So we know that Boaz is probably a lot older than Ruth. "You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. And all the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am a guardian redeemer of our family, there is another who is more closely related than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to do this duty as your guardian redeemer, good. Let him redeem you. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it. Lie here until morning." And so she lay at his feet until morning, but got up before anyone could be recognized. And he said, "No one must know that a woman came to the threshing floor." A lot of the times, prostitutes came to the threshing floor. And so Ruth is taking a huge gamble here. She's taking a huge risk, and she is counting on what she knows about Boaz in terms of his integrity and character here. So we now, in chapter 3, discover a twist in the story. Boaz says, "Ruth, I am willing to marry you and redeem you. I am interested in you, Ruth, but you should know something. I'm not your late husband Mahlon's closest blood relative. There's another." Boaz says that I have noticed this about you, Ruth, that you have not been out on the town and all over everything and everyone, looking just for any man. I mean, there's a lot of women who just want to find any man. No. I get loneliness. I get it. But if you're single here, just don't try and find any man to fill the hole. Ruth doesn't do it. She wasn't looking for any man. She's looking for the right man. And he says, "You're not like that. I've noticed that about you, Ruth. That you have character. Right, you're a woman of noble character." The Proverbs 31 woman right there. "I will be your redeemer. I want to marry you, Ruth. I will marry you." And I wonder if you notice what is happening here. We know from that passage that Boaz has been fancying Ruth for some time now. He's had his eye on Ruth for some time now because he's been doing the math, church. He's been doing some research. He's been asking. He's been wanting to know what's the story here with Ruth. And Boaz, his research is that he's not the closest relative, but there's another. But he's been interested. And Boaz has a heart for Ruth beyond Levitical obligation. Stay here the night. It's not sexual, it's just pragmatic. Tomorrow I will sort this out. Tomorrow I will, and literally it happens the next day, as we're going to find out next week. Tomorrow I'm going to sort this out, Ruth. And here again is Boaz's character. But Ruth, we have to go through the right processes of the law, and we've got to go to the city gates. And he also said, "Bring me the shawl you are wearing and hold it out." And when she did so, he poured into it 6 measures of barley and placed the bundle on her. And then he went back to town. And when Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, "How did it go, my daughter?" I can just see them. I'll put the cuppa on. I'll put the cuppa on. Let's sit down and talk about it. Oh, yeah. You know how it goes. Ladies. Let's chat about this. Let's get some gossip happening. Right? And then she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. And then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens. Don't rush. Come on, Boaz, have you found out? Come on, Boaz, let me know. No, just wait. Because Naomi, she knows Boaz. Just wait what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. So here in this closing section of chapter 3, Boaz is thinking about Ruth's reputation. Other workers might be getting up early. They see a woman leaving the threshing floor. Oh, wow, Boaz has had an interesting night, hasn't he? Wow, wow, look at that. No, he's thinking about Ruth's reputation, so she leaves early. Why? He wants no misunderstandings from others and gossips about the purpose of his nighttime visit, which could jeopardize the path both of them are now on. Boaz takes Ruth's shawl and pours in 6 measures of barley. He's thinking not only of Ruth, but he's showing kindness to Ruth and he's showing kindness to Naomi. He's showing kindness to the mother-in-law. He's a smart guy. And Ruth's kindness to Naomi that we've read about in chapter 1 is now being matched by Boaz's kindness towards Ruth. So kindness attracts kindness. I'm going to talk about this in a marriage sermon in about a month's time. Let me tell you, married people, that the secret and foundations of a happy marriage are kindness and patience. Husband, kindness to your wife. Kindness to your wife. Patience to your wife. Kindness and patience, husband, goes a long way. And Boaz is now showing kindness to Ruth and Naomi. Naomi is being matched by Boaz's kindness towards Ruth. And you know what? I find it amazing that Naomi in chapter 1 said that she left Bethlehem full and she returned empty. But she is now full. There is bread once again in the house of Bethlehem. And as we come to the end of chapter 3, we begin to see how our author understands the grace and providence of God. And as we go through this series, in particular as we wrap it up with chapter 4 next week, that we understand too the grace and providence of God at work in our own lives and in our story and our circumstances and events of our life. There is always a second story being written by and through the events of human choices and human circumstances. There is a second story being written in your life today as well. And God's grace is expressed to us in simple things like opportunities to glean in a stranger's field. Just happens. And all of these things came through the generous hand of Boaz as Ruth's Redeemer. And it's all going to come together in chapter 4 next week. So don't miss it.